So I was on the school building committee, and this space was reserved for artwork, but no artwork was designated for it. And Carolyn Cragen, the superintendent when the building was started, and Mr. Newby, the STEM teacher, he's also on the committee, we're talking about what to put here and sort of brainstorming some segmented pieces that could go. And I said, yeah, that's an easy problem. And it turned into, we started brainstorming ideas about what does a school represent, what do students represent, what is the learning. So a lot of concepts kind of came out. Carolyn gave her favorite quotes. She had like sheets and sheets of her favorite quotes that she'd been collecting over the years. Started using that to think about pieces. And then I realized as I was making some images and concepts that it was much bigger than I could do. And so I enlisted Tracy, who is a very different artist than I am. And so I thought the counter position would be pretty cool, and it was.
I was contacted by my friend, talented architect extraordinaire, and Leslie mentioned she had been a part of the process for the building itself. And I was very excited to, offer any sort of help that I could. I advocated for the regionalization and was eager to see this high school as a success. And she invited me to join her and Mike Newby and Carolyn and sort of brainstorm. And I didn't know how involved that would mean that I was, or just like spitball some ideas, so I started brainstorming a little bit and gathering some images and things before we first started having some of those regular meetings. Basically, a lot of freedom was given to conceptualizing what to do with this space. But in particular, we were focusing on, the disciplines, what are the different educational sort of disciplines? And how can we be inclusive of everybody's experience? Not like we don't want to focus too much on one sport or one academic field of study. So we were cognizant of being inclusive. We were looking for a way to be inclusive in terms of the joining of Chatham and Harwich and Monomoy, and perhaps pay some homage to, the Native American roots, but also very particularly some of the stuff that went into this building. There was a turtle pathway that created some controversy for a little while. So really kind of inspired me to think in terms of like the macro and the micro and where they kind of come together. Like we have this sort of smaller experience in our community and the foundations of learning, but then the concepts kind of explode out into bigger things, sort of further out, it goes. It's a broader scope as opposed to closer in, more specifics about the disciplines themselves.
So Tracy started meeting with all of us, and all the ideas, how to finally get these ideas into one place. We evolved into bands or ribbons or waves of thoughts. And so we started brainstorming ribbons of different concepts. It all kind of came together with the very beginning of it is a Mother Teresa quote that says, "I alone cannot change the world, but," we omitted the but I can cast a stone across the waters to create many ripples." So it's the ripples coming out. So it's the idea of one person versus many people and all that can happen and all that one person could maybe do. So we did that, Tracy and I, and how a lot of, we'll talk about concepts, but a lot of it also was the union of Monomoy between Chatham and Harwich. How do we bring the two together? Very much the landmass actually worked perfectly for Harwich and Chatham exactly to fit there. So we have this concept of a safe harbor on land and all the things you can do going out into the world. So Tracy and I started brainstorming further than, we first worked with Mr. Newby and Carolyn Cragen, and then on our own, just started tracing out and drawing a lot of things. And then we divided the ribbons into pieces and would develop our ribbon further and then come together and figure out how those pieces related to each other. We originally thought we would make it out of all metal, and I had drafted a silly thing, kind of how elaborate it was. And we sent it off to a couple CNC companies, and they said there's no way we could ever do it. And Tracy found Steve Swain from Frying Pan Gallery. So we enlisted him into part of the project, and he became some big steps near middle to end of how the concepts all come together, and then very much logistics on how we were going to make the metal pieces, how we would attach it all to the wall, and put that together.
So Tracy and Leslie actually Tracy I knew from Hangarby, and she had mentioned to me that she was working on something and that she needed some advice, and then that became some chats about what they were doing, and then eventually I just offered to get involved and help them they had a lot of ideas. They had a lot of ideas, designs, sketches that they wanted to make into reality, but they didn't really have a firm idea of how to
an actual piece of art. So my metal working, metal design, my ability to produce things out of metal, this workshop and the studio and the whole thing kind of came together. I joined a large chunk of my studio to the whole piece that we sort of assembled on a table that was laid out to be the space, and then we just kind of pulled it all together.
The whole thing was awesome, and it was really great when, as we started talking about some of the metal stuff, another friend, Steve, who I was, big fan of his work, and that one of my favorite things was just like this group of three that we became doing a lot of this weird late night work. We're all very different and brought very different aspects to it. And so personally, one of my favorite things about it was that collaborative spirit, which I think is very clear in the finished product. One piece that jumps out at mind that's really sort of small and may get overlooked sometimes is this Wampanoag bracelet up here, which we did a lot of different research. We did a lot of research into, some of the Native American parts and history in this area to find different ways to reflect that. There's also some other elements of that in the piece, but I ended up finding this artist from the local group reservation, and that's an actual photo of traditional beading that she does. And so she was very kind in offering that image. I love, that we have the sign language letters just as another way of sort of accessing, being inclusive, different languages. The We the People is in multiple languages up above. Personally speaking, I've in different stages of some artistic work that I've been doing, really connecting digital to organic. For me, like the ones and zeros and the coding and stuff like that, and how the natural world, that infinite variables, and how the natural world takes forms of patterns, which is all just, the matrices, the series of ones and zeros.
Well, the initial design part, I have a background in architecture and construction, and I had just done a big installation up in Boston, using the same kind of, the same company that made these panels. So the idea of the panels as a background was kind of a given to this project, and then the idea of constructing it in sections that could be built in the studio and then taken apart in individual sections, was really kind of perfect for this, so that we could install it and not have to be in here for days on end assembling it, as well as my concerns, because I've done a lot of public space pieces, and knowing that in public spaces there's always the possibility that there could be damage, there could be vandalism. So being able to remove sections of the piece to repair them or to redo them was really appealing for this situation. So that's kind of why it's broken up into all the different panels, so that they can be serviced if need be.
Well, I was saying to Leslie just a moment ago that I don't think she had given herself enough credit as sort of the real mind behind in terms of how the hell this was all, pardon me, gonna work. I came and gave some like, hey, here's some images or splashy ideas, or, but Leslie has such skill in terms of technically being able to transfer a concept, an artistic image into a tangible file that we could then send off to places or manipulate in a digital format, which, I mean, we would have been completely lost without a way to digitize all of these things.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, it's just the different ways we work and the different ways of thinking about things. Because when we come together, you'd have like an explosion. Here's what I want to do. I have a sound wave and I have it changing to this. And it was like, how do we represent that with a piece of material? Tracy did the background pieces. We wanted it to look like a grid, like it was a piece of grid paper. And it's all from textbooks.
Yeah, that's more representative of some artwork that I've previously done in the sense of paper and collage, and then coated or set in resin. And so I put it out there to the Facebook space and had people bring me old textbooks. And so in all of the collaging panels behind it, it's different cut up bits of textbook and then resin coated on top of it. And then I forget, later on in the process is when we decided to have the silhouette, right? Yeah. And then, you know, different images, different people's photos from history, sort of as, you know, past, present, future, looking at it, looking forward, and trying to give it direction, right? Just from a very fundamental visual appeal, it needed to have a flow, you know, sort of something drawing the eye left to right, which is, I think, part of where the band sort of first came from. Yeah. It was always, there was always the anchor point of the physical map, the land.
As the starting point. And then, and we did, as we were brainstorming, we took different bands, and like, you had the bottom portion and I had the upper portion, and then we'd come together and we'd cross.
Yeah.
You could do that
and
with
we'd
this
sort of,
one, you could do that, but the concepts always, we kind of divided the different concepts.
Well, or we would sort it, like we'd be like, well, we like this thing, but what does it go with?
Right.
And so there is at least there was in our heads, a reason why certain things led to another thing. Sometimes just simply because of the physical shape, that visually it would look right going from one to another, and then sometimes it was also because of the content of what it is, you know, and sort of music and sound is sort of a really big starting place from over here, because that black piece that goes up is a digital representation of music that is, and correct me if I'm wrong, the same music that is drafted in the...
They're both a piece from Mozart. So there's the bars of the music, and then there's a digital sound. I'm not sure how, you know, if you were to look it up online, it's the digital playing of the same piece of music.
Yeah, and then obviously different abstractions of sound waves, you know, echoing this, you know, we had, the water was a big thing of how to represent all this water, you know, and what mediums to do that. And Leslie had some experience from the architecture world of the company that does these panels for different wall or mounting different things. And then we had the quote that we really liked that led with ripples. And so then the background, you found this this pattern, this particular carving of a what do you call it? VDF? VF? What's the material? The white?
It's an MDF board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so water, waves, motion, sound is sort of part of ripples, and that sort of set it off.
Tell us about any problems you ran into.
I think the biggest hiccups were just finding time to do it.
Yeah.
Both finding time to do it, and it was just, it was a hard thing, like how to make. I feel like we all kind of got stuck at certain points on what we could do.
And there were some like logistical things, like some things where we realized if we were doing a laser cut of this, it would be too thin. Or one of the hardest things the sound wave came apart. One of the other hardest things was figuring out how to lay it. And Steve can certainly speak to that, but how we were going to assemble it, what had to go underneath first and then over. But also I think an interesting thing for some of the images, we had to get permission to use them. And for the space image, there was some interesting work trying to communicate and find out who had the rights to it and whether or not we could use it, which required a few random emails to NASA. And they were like, we really don't care. Do whatever you want. And
We did, actually, surprisingly, not difficult, but a little bit of logistics. So the We the People band that Tracy was saying, we purposely wanted to sort of change, We the People when it was first written was not really an inclusive thing. And we thought it was pretty cool to make it, We the People, we the students, we the people in this building. And so we had all of the language teachers give us quotes, how do you say it in the different languages? But it wasn't really oh, here you go. It was, well, you wouldn't translate it quite in this way. That was kind of funny.
Yeah, the plastics proved to be a challenging material to work with in terms of, you can't quite see that it's also etched in two different ways, and how fragile it would be as cutting it out and then peeling all the like little backings off of each piece was somewhat difficult. I really liked the silhouettes. Leslie and I were just trying to go through who some of them are, although we purposely, it's not super obvious who the silhouette is because we want you to be able to sort of see yourself in it. And also, with the idea that perhaps there'll be a teacher in the building who will ask somebody to, choose a silhouette and find out about that person. And sort of getting into some of the seascape, water, that kind of stuff, also understanding that where we are is an ocean community. The bikes, that was another thing about where the building is itself, that conceptually, why, it was important to highlight that we were on the bike path here.
That was something with the building committee that the architect for the building emphasized. I don't know if anyone even realizes the library entrance is facing the bike path. We thought that people would be coming a lot by bike, and weren't sure if that really was going to happen, but we did include it in athletics. And the majority of the formulas, a lot has to do with velocity, wave action, and motion. So almost all of the formulas are, I actually wrote down what they were because I was trying to remember, but they were motion and like the F equals m times a is Newton's second law of motion. The V equals u plus at is another equation of motion, velocity moving. And then the delta t equals td ut is actually having to do with terrestrial time and the difference between time. And so we felt like it was a good transition where we're talking about water and the theta, I think, or the lambda, the wavelength, where we had a lot of water and water kind of things. Then we went, all right, now we're going up to the sky and we're going out to outer space. We went to the natural world. It's it could be a net pulling all those fish out of the water, or it could be a spider web and the marshes and things coming out of it. On on the more scientific wavelength band turned into, the moon and the phases of the moon, the molecular system, different areas of science, just like you said, the small down to the big, up to Orion's belt.
I remember early on one thing was about like dots, like connecting the dots. And so like some very literal manifestations of that with the molecules, which Steve was able to order these cool big ball bearings
really cool.
and fuse those together.
The picture next to it is an image of wood on the cellulose level.
Right. And sort of, again, that idea that an image of cellular activity can sometimes mirror cosmic-looking photography and activity. There's that little turtle head, in case that gets missed.
Oh, yeah. When you were saying turtle, I actually thought we eliminated it over time, but I forgot. We do. We have the turtle head peeking out.
Was there anything specifically that like you couldn't put in?
There's a lot we couldn't put in. Although I would say the majority of it, the really big, I guess you find out the most important pieces and they make their way in. And
Yeah.
the things that were kind of extra fell by the wayside.
Yeah.
But we made sure, I don't know if everyone's found, the Rough Rider and the Monomoy Devil are in there.
Yes. Yes. Which maybe is a good moment to also talk about the painting, the words and the quotes.
Yeah.
And where those are all, it's sort of very subtly, we tried to have those in there. And some credit due to Greg Vaughn, who is an artist, local artist, does incredible signs and details, and he really helped us figure out how to hide these in here. We initially were going to have all of it etched in the metal in terms of the quotes, right? Which some of them are. We were just saying in the landmass and also on like the compass rose, but those are a little bit hard to hear.
Yeah.
But it also was hard to figure out with the shadows in here, like how much you were going to be able to see or how much would be blocked by different parts of the day.
The idea, the quotes tend to sort of help guide through. They kind of go along with their section, which we thought was pretty good.
We did. We did. There's a piece of the lighthouse right there.
What happened to the rest of that? That's for the Monomoy Lighthouse.
Yeah, for the
Some of that
school
got
logo.
lost. Yeah, that's the edge of the school logo.
No, it's not lost. It was just meant to be a gentle reference.
I think we had more
Oh.
at one time.
Relief to a certain extent for me, because we were working on it in sections in Steve's studio, and getting the sections over here without things, we were sort of gently tapping them into place there in the studio so that it could be then put into the holes that they were, and keeping track of what went where. And there were a few moments with these bands trying to get them to go in over each other where we all were kind of like, uh-oh. But amazingly, it worked.
Yeah, there was some exhausted relief.
Yeah.
I also, like we've talked about how it's a piece about what could be achieved. I kind of felt that when I stood back. Remember when we were done and we stood up there and looked at it? I remember being pretty amazed. It's a lot.
Yeah, it was a heady task before us, and I feel like we went as broad and as big of a concept and a space. At first it's sort of intimidating how large this recess is to fill. And then we realized we had so many ideas, how are we going to narrow it down after at first being like, that's a massive amount of space. And so I think we felt like we'd accomplished one of the main goals was that people are going to be walking by it every day for years of their life. And so we wanted it to always be able to find something new in it. And stepping back after it was all done really felt like we'd accomplished that.
And to point out, all three of us, our children, are in the Monomoy school system. And they were quite young when we started this.
Yeah.
Like I was saying, my oldest is now going through this building, and I know for me, the thought that my daughters would be walking by this every day was pretty inspiring.